on. If you guys read last week's Parshat, you'll know that there's also a discussion about going to war in last week's Parshat. And we find that there's three categories of men who are exempt from service. So who are they? They're the man who has built a new house but hasn't yet lived in it, a man who's planted a vineyard but has not redeemed it, whatever that means, and I'll explain that. And the man who is betrothed to the woman but has not married her yet. So the Moshe and the Torah are sensitive to the fact that these are situations that that the young take on, building a new house, planting a vineyard, getting betrothed, and that it would be a terrible shame and really a loss of something fundamentally important in life if a life were to be snuffed out because of war before a person had a chance to experience this. So in all three of those categories, there is an additional phrase, lest he die in war and another man inaugurate the house, or redeem the vineyard, or marry the woman. Now, redeeming the vineyard is an interesting one because we can finish building a house, and we know the day it's finished, you can go in and inhabit it and inaugurate it. The inaugurate it is really a reference to Hanukkah Bayit, which literally means inaugurate or dedicate the house, affixing the menorah and saying some prayers.
Mezuzah.
Right, on mezuzah.
Yeah.
Thank you. But the man who plants a vineyard, that's an interesting one to me, and it hasn't been redeemed yet because that is a really long process. That is a process that even after you plant the vineyard, it takes 4 years until you're allowed to really taste the fruits of it. First 3 years you don't, and then in the fourth year you're supposed to collect whatever you're going to tithe and make your pilgrimage to Yerushalayim and enjoy the wine there with other people, with all the other people who are making pilgrimages. So I think that's an interesting one where the person who's exempt from service is exempt for a significant length of time. Now, there's a fourth mention of a type of exemption from service that has nothing to do with these. Well, on the surface, maybe nothing to do with it, but to me, everything is connected. And that is the man who is fearful and faint-hearted. So the Torah identifies this particular man has been conscripted into service, and it also says, let him go and return to his house, and let him not melt the heart of his fellows like his own heart. So to me, this shows that the depth of understanding in the Torah that fear, anxiety, and dread are potentially contagious, and that an extremely fearful or emotionally compromised soldier can negatively affect the morale of all those around him. So how sympathetic is the Torah to those men starting out in life with a new house, a new vineyard, a new fiance, not to want to deprive these young people of these important life experiences. So to me, what do I learn from that? That God wants us to enjoy all these important experiences, and that God is sensitive to our fears, whether they are reasonable or irrational. What a profound understanding of human psychology, once again displayed in our Parsha. So how do I connect it to this week's Parsha? Well, we talk about the fearful categories of war in last week's Parsha, and then we talk about the other end of the spectrum, a man who goes out and is victorious. And we know that these are extraordinary circumstances regardless, whether you are victorious or whether you have been overcome by abject fear, because war is dramatic, dangerous, horrific, terrifying, and confusing, and sometimes exhilarating. And I'm sure, Rabbi, you can say something about that kind of exhilaration too. The Torah understands that men will act differently under the pressures of war and anticipates the need for rules to be in place in order to help them maintain a just and moral code of behavior, because the pressures of war can really fray that kind of resolve. For that reason, and because the thrill of victory can be intoxicating and blind one, to what is just and righteous and moral, this week's Parsha gives specific instructions to the victorious soldier who sees a beautiful woman among the nation he has just conquered, and he captures her to take her to his home. To the victor goes the spoils, and she is a spoil of war. But the Torah limits what he may do with her and when he may do it, so as to give sufficient time and space for emotions and passions to cool on his side, and also for her to mourn and grieve her loss of family and friends. And to defeat this instinct to objectify her, the Torah says she must be taken as a wife, not merely as a mistress, or not to be taken in any other circumstances. So interesting, right after this and all the rules pertaining to what is done with her and for how long, we learn about the rules of a soldier not only taking this woman captive, but we also learn about the inviolable rights of the firstborn, and a situation that describes a man with two wives, one loved and one hated. And yes, the Torah does say that one of the wives is hated. And in fact, this word, snu'ah, the only other place in Torah that we find it is in a description for Leah. So we kind of have a microcosm of what went on with Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, with a loved wife and a hated wife. And now the situation where an ordinary person goes out to battle and takes on an additional wife. And one of the wives here, and it doesn't really specify in our Parsha which one is loved and which one is hated. In the story of Rachel and Leah, of course, we know that Rachel is the loved wife and Leah is the less preferred wife, but literally the hated wife. But here it's a little more confusing. Is the loved wife ultimately the first wife, or is the loved wife this new wife that was captured in the field of battle? Some of the lessons will apply regardless of which, but I think it's really interesting to point out that the Torah doesn't really tell us which is which. So this whole idea of treating one differently than the other, therefore the Torah anticipates that it could extend to the firstborn. And if it's the firstborn of the first wife, who ends up being the less loved wife, then the Torah comes in and Moshe instructs that he cannot be denied his due as firstborn, as the Bechor, and what he's entitled to, a double portion. Then the Torah makes a little bit of a turn and descends into a discussion about the wayward and rebellious son. But to me, we're meant to see the cause and effect of this difficult situation, one in which a man introduces a new wife from a foreign nation, perhaps causing his original wife to be hated, or perhaps causing the second wife to be hated when the luster and newness and passion fades, as I said. This unfortunate situation then has a devastating effect on the family and on the children. So to me, the connection here with the paragraph in the narrative about the wayward son is that this family situation then produces the wayward and rebellious son. The son, perhaps, that's born of the less preferred wife, and perhaps isn't treated the way a Bechor should be treated. And I think, actually, to bring it back to Amalek, that this then goes all the way back to the micro of what happened with the original Amalek, who was the grandson of Esav, and his mother was the concubine. So therefore, a wife that didn't have not even the status of wife, and perhaps less preferred. So the son of a concubine and feeling this sense of displacement already, because the grandfather, Esav, was already displaced in the house with Yaakov and Esav. So we see these dynamics that are playing out, and one in turn leads to a whole nation of Amalek that hates Jews forever. And that's discussed at the end of the Parsha. But here we're talking about trying to nip the situation in the bud when it can become a live and new problem in each family. So what happens with the wayward and rebellious son? It's a really drastic remedy. The mother and father take him to the elders of the city, explain that he is a glutton and a drunkard, and then all the men of the city pelt him with stones. Everyone has to participate in this stoning death. And then the Torah tells us, and you shall remove the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and they shall fear. So why would it say that all Israel shall hear and they shall fear? I think it's exactly because the Torah is warning us that we are all responsible for this. We're responsible in our own family, we're responsible in our community, and that it all starts with us, which is an empowering notion that we are faced with over and over again in Torah. But it is also a notion of abject responsibility. So this is a cautionary tale. It's never happened. The rabbi says it's never happened that a son has been taken out and stoned to death, and it never will happen. But one last thought, just so that we don't automatically think that all of these issues are only about men who go out to war, our sages have also expanded a really important concept that starts off our Parsha. Our Parsha begins with a pasuk that says, when you will go out to war against your enemies. And our sages have said, your enemies aren't only the people that you face in war. Your enemies are your Yetzer Hara. And therefore, anything that tempts us to stray from what we know is just, righteous, and moral, that's who we're doing battle with. Shabbat Shalom.